A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn, and I am joined as always by my brother, the man who knows the serial numbers on the concrete barriers outside the consulate.
Herman Poppleberry, at your service. It is a heavy, almost electric atmosphere here in Jerusalem today, Corn. I think anyone walking down toward the embassy area in Arnona, or even near the old consulate sites on Agron Street, has seen the physical manifestation of what we are going to talk about today. It is not just a few extra guards. It is a total transformation of the urban landscape.
It is impossible to miss. The concrete T-walls are being craned in at 3 in the morning, the extra layers of anti-climb fencing are going up, and the local police presence on the outer perimeter has tripled. And then, of course, you have those very serious-looking guys in dark suits with the coiled earpieces standing just inside the gates, looking like they are waiting for a small army to show up. It feels less like a place of diplomacy, and more like a forward operating base. Our housemate Daniel was actually asking about the mechanics of this recently. He wanted to know how this whole security dance works behind the scenes, especially when a country like the United States or Israel decides to suddenly surge its security presence on foreign soil.
It is a timely question, Daniel, because what we are seeing right now on this 12th of March, 2026, is a massive tectonic shift in how diplomatic missions are protected. Following the start of the campaign against the Iranian regime last month, the threat level has obviously spiked to unprecedented levels. We saw the direct strikes on the missions in Riyadh and Baghdad just 3 days ago on the 9th of March. Those attacks were more than just acts of violence, they were a message. And that has triggered what the State Department calls a drawdown in some places, but in others, like here in Jerusalem, it is a massive hardening.
And that hardening creates a really fascinating friction, doesn't it? On one hand, you have a country that has a moral and legal obligation to protect its people. On the other, you have a host nation that is supposed to be the one providing that protection. When the Americans or the Israelis bring in more of their own guards, it sends a message that is not always purely about safety. It is a geopolitical statement that can be quite loud.
It is what we call the diplomatic dance of security. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of that fortress. We will look at the legal frameworks like the Vienna Convention, the specific roles of agencies like the Diplomatic Security Service and the Shin Bet, and that very sensitive tension between tactical necessity and diplomatic optics. We are going to ask, is a secure embassy actually a sign of a failing relationship?
I think a good place to start, Herman, is a visual of that fortress. When you see a mission get hardened like this, it feels like it is becoming isolated from the city it lives in. We have talked before in episode 501 about the split footprint of the United States presence here in Jerusalem, but this is different. This is about the wall going up and the drawbridge being pulled.
Right, and there is a paradox there. The primary job of a diplomat is to engage with the host nation, to build bridges, to be out in the community, to eat at the local cafes and talk to the people. But the more secure an embassy becomes, the more it looks like a bunker, and the harder it is to do that job. You are effectively living in a high-security bubble, and that bubble can become a prison for the very diplomacy it is meant to protect.
So, let us get into the rules of that bubble. People often say that an embassy is foreign soil. I have heard that my entire life. If you step onto the grounds of the United States Embassy in Jerusalem, you are technically in America. Is that actually true, or is that just a movie trope that has infected our collective consciousness?
That is one of the biggest misconceptions in international law, Corn. It is a complete myth. An embassy compound is not the sovereign territory of the sending state. The land beneath the United States Embassy in Jerusalem is still Israeli territory. The land beneath the Israeli Embassy in Washington is still American territory. If a baby is born inside the embassy, they do not automatically get citizenship based on the soil because the soil hasn't changed hands.
So if it is not foreign soil, what is it? Why can't the local police just run in there if they think a crime is happening?
It is what the law calls inviolable. This comes from the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961. Specifically, Article 22. It says that the premises of a diplomatic mission are inviolable. The agents of the host state, meaning the local police, the tax collectors, or the military, cannot enter the premises without the express consent of the head of the mission. It is a legal shield, not a territorial transfer.
Okay, so the local police cannot just walk in to serve a warrant or check the fire extinguishers unless they are invited. But that does not mean the land belongs to the other country. It is more like a very high-level version of my house, my rules, but backed by international treaty.
And the host nation actually has a special duty under that same Article 22. They are required to take all appropriate steps to protect the premises of the mission against any intrusion or damage and to prevent any disturbance of the peace of the mission. This is the foundation of the whole system. The host nation is the primary guardian.
That is where the friction starts, right? Because if the host nation, say Israel or the United Arab Emirates, is legally responsible for protecting the embassy, then why does the United States send its own guys? Why do we see Marine security guards and diplomatic security service agents everywhere? If I am the host nation and I see you bringing in 50 extra guys with submachine guns, I might feel like you were saying I am incompetent.
That is the core of the tension. It is a layered approach. Think of it like a series of concentric circles. The outermost circle is the host nation's responsibility. That is the local police on the street, the checkpoints blocks away, the intelligence monitoring. But as you move closer to the gate, the sending state wants its own eyes and its own guns. They want people who report directly to them, not to a foreign capital.
And that brings us to what we might call the implicit insult. If I am the United States and I tell a host country, hey, we are bringing in an extra 50 armed agents to guard our building, am I basically saying that I do not trust their police to do the job? Am I saying their security is compromised?
In many cases, yes. That is exactly how it is perceived. It is a major point of contention in diplomatic cables. When a country surges its own security, it is a signal that they believe the host nation's security environment is either compromised, insufficient, or perhaps even hostile. Look at what happened in the United Arab Emirates just a couple of weeks ago in late February. There was that covert extraction of staff because of a perceived threat that the local authorities allegedly were not acting on fast enough. The Americans felt they couldn't wait for the Emiratis to clear the path, so they did it themselves. That created a huge amount of bitterness. The host nation feels their sovereignty is being brushed aside, and it suggests they can't even control their own streets.
It seems like a no-win situation for the diplomats. If you do not surge security and something happens, like the tragedies we saw in the past, you are blamed for negligence. But if you do surge, you offend your hosts and potentially damage the relationship you are there to maintain. How do they balance that on a daily basis?
It is a constant, grueling calibration, and you have to look at who these players are. In the United States system, the lead is the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, or DS. The people you see on the ground are Regional Security Officers, or RSOs. These are special agents. They are federal law enforcement. But they are operating in a country where they have no actual police powers. They are essentially high-end bodyguards with a badge that doesn't work outside the gate.
Wait, that is an important distinction. If an RSO sees someone climbing the fence of the embassy in Jerusalem, can they arrest them? Can they put them in handcuffs and take them to a jail inside the embassy?
Technically, no. They can detain them on the compound to stop the immediate threat, but they have to hand them over to the Israeli National Police as soon as possible. Outside the gate, on the sidewalk, that RSO has no more legal authority to make an arrest than you or I do. They are there for protection, not law enforcement. If they chase someone down the street and tackle them, they are technically committing an assault under local law, unless they can prove it was immediate self-defense.
But they are armed. We see the sidearms, and sometimes we see the heavier stuff during a motorcade. How does that work if they don't have police powers?
They are armed based on bilateral agreements. This is not just a free-for-all. Every weapon, every guard, every radio frequency used by a foreign mission has to be negotiated with the host nation's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This is often done through a document called a note verbale. It is a formal third-person diplomatic note. The embassy will send a note verbale saying, "We intend to increase our security complement by 20 personnel, and they will be carrying these specific types of firearms."
I imagine those negotiations are incredibly tedious. Does the host nation ever just say no?
They say no all the time. The host nation usually wants to limit the number of armed foreigners on their soil. They want to know exactly who they are, what kind of weapons they have, and they want them to have local credentials. For example, in many countries, diplomatic security guards have to carry a specific ID card issued by the host nation's police or foreign ministry that says they are authorized to carry a weapon in the performance of their duties. If they get stopped by a local cop and they don't have that card, they are in deep trouble.
So it is not like the movies where a team of commandos just lands in a Black Hawk on the roof and takes over the street.
Not unless things have completely fallen apart and you are in a non-permissive environment. In a functional relationship like the United States and Israel, it is a very tight daily liaison. You have the RSO at the embassy talking to the Shin Bet and the police every single day. They share intelligence, they coordinate motorcade routes, they talk about the protesters at the gate. But even in a close relationship, there is jurisdictional friction.
Give me an example of that friction. What does it look like on a Tuesday morning in Jerusalem?
Okay, let us say there is a suspicious vehicle parked near the embassy. The American security team sees it on their high-definition cameras and they think it might be a car bomb. They want it moved immediately, but it is on a public street. They cannot just go out there and tow it. They have to call the local police. If the local police are busy with a protest elsewhere, or they do not think it is a high priority, you have a bunch of very stressed out American agents watching a monitor and a bunch of local cops who think the Americans are being paranoid. If the Americans go out and try to move the car themselves, they are violating Israeli sovereignty.
And that is where the fortress mentality comes in. If you do not trust the local response to be fast enough, you start building bigger walls and deeper setbacks, so that the car bomb doesn't matter as much. You mentioned the Inman report earlier. We should probably explain what that is for the listeners who aren't as nerdy about embassy architecture as you are.
The Inman Report is the Bible of modern diplomatic security. It was written in 1985 by Admiral Bobby Ray Inman after the horrific bombings of the embassy and the Marine barracks in Beirut in the early 80s. It established the standards we see today. The most famous one is the 100-foot setback.
100 feet of empty space between the building and the street. That is a lot of real estate in a crowded city like Jerusalem or London.
It is designed to protect against vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. That one rule changed the face of diplomacy. It meant you couldn't have embassies in charming old buildings in the city center anymore. You had to move them to the outskirts, to big plots of land where you could build a perimeter. It basically institutionalized the isolation we were talking about. It turned embassies into islands.
It is interesting because we see the tension even here. The embassy in Jerusalem is in a residential adjacent area. When they put up those massive walls, the neighbors complained. It affects the property values. It affects the traffic. It makes the neighborhood feel like a war zone. But from the RSO's perspective, the neighbors' complaints are secondary to the threat of a truck bomb.
And in 2026, that threat is not theoretical. With the current campaign against Iran, we are seeing a level of state-sponsored threat that we haven't seen in decades. The foiled plots in late February that were reported by Israel Hayam showed that Iran-linked cells were looking for any vulnerability in missions globally. They aren't just looking for a gate to ram, they are looking for drone launch points, cyber vulnerabilities, and ways to intercept diplomats when they are at their most vulnerable. Outside the fortress.
Let us talk about the different types of security personnel, because it is not just guys in suits. You have the Marine security guards, the MSGs. They are iconic. They are in uniform. Everyone knows who they are. But then you have this other layer, the plainclothes guys, and even private contractors. Which one causes more friction with the host nation?
Definitely the plainclothes and the contractors. The Marines are actually quite easy to manage from a jurisdictional standpoint because their role is very clearly defined. They are there to protect the classified information and the personnel inside the building. They almost never operate outside the walls. They are the internal defense. They are the last stand, guys.
Right. They are the ones who stay behind to burn the papers and smash the hard drives if the embassy is being overrun.
But the plainclothes teams, the ones who do the advance, work for a diplomat's meeting or who provide close protection for an ambassador at a restaurant. They are the ones in the gray zone. When they are out in the city, they look like civilians, but they are armed. If they get into a confrontation with a local citizen or, heaven forbid, a local police officer who doesn't recognize them, things can go south very fast.
We saw something like that in episode 1060 when we talked about the persona non grata process. Often, a diplomat or a security officer gets kicked out not because they were spying, but because they had a run-in with local law enforcement that became a sovereignty issue. A "don't you know who I am" moment that ends with a police report.
And it is even more complicated when you outsource that security to private military contractors or PMCs. This was a huge issue in the 2010s, and it is making a comeback now in 26 because the demand for security is so high that the government agencies can't keep up. When a government hires a private company to guard its mission, those guards don't have diplomatic immunity. They are just private citizens with guns. If they shoot someone, the legal nightmare is 10 times worse than if a government agent did it.
So why do they do it? Why not just send more government agents?
It is a numbers game. The diplomatic security service is large, but it is not large enough to provide high threat protection for every mission in a world where Iran is actively targeting them. So they hire contractors for the static security, the guys standing at the gates or checking badges. It saves money and it keeps the regular agents free for more complex work. But it adds a layer of risk and a layer of unaccountability that host nations absolutely hate. They don't want Blackwater-style operators running around their capital.
I want to go back to the role of the host nation's own elite units. Here in Israel, the Shin Bet has its own unit that protects Israeli diplomats abroad. How does that compare to the American model?
The Shin Bet's Unit 730 is legendary in this world. Their philosophy is a bit different from the American DSS. Because Israel is a smaller country and has been dealing with these threats for so long, their security footprint is often more discreet but much more aggressive if triggered. They rely heavily on what they call proactive defense.
Discreet as in they don't want the big fortress?
They still want the fortress, but they are out there doing intelligence work in the host country, often in ways that push the boundaries of what a guest is allowed to do. There is a famous story about an Israeli security team in a European capital that was basically running their own surveillance net around the embassy blocks away. The local police found out and were furious. They felt like the Israelis were acting like they owned the city. It is that sovereignty myth again. The sending state starts to feel like they have a right to control the environment around their mission because they are the ones who will pay the price if it fails.
And from their perspective, can you blame them? Look at the history. When a mission is attacked, nobody blames the host nation's police first. They blame the sending state for not being prepared. So the RSOs and the Shin Bet agents feel this immense pressure to take control of everything they can see.
And that brings us to the question of who is actually in charge when a threat is detected. Walk with me through the mechanics. If the intelligence comes in that a hit team is moving toward the embassy in Jerusalem right now, who is the commander?
I would assume it is the host nation, since it is their territory.
On paper, yes. In that moment, the liaison is everything. The RSO is on a direct line to the Jerusalem District Police and the Shin Bet, but inside the fence, the RSO is the absolute commander. They will lock down the building, move personnel to safe rooms, and the Marines will take up defensive positions. Outside the fence, it is the Israeli show. The Israeli police will set up the cordons and move in to neutralize the threat.
But what if the American security team sees the threat first? What if they see a guy with an RPG on a balcony across the street, and they have a clear shot from the roof? Can they take it?
That is the ultimate jurisdictional nightmare. Technically, firing a weapon from the embassy into a public street is a massive violation of the host nation's sovereignty. It is an act of force on foreign soil. But if it is to save lives, they will take the shot and deal with the diplomatic fallout later. This is why the rules of engagement are so carefully negotiated. There are literally binders of paper that define exactly when a foreign guard can pull a trigger on a host nation's street. It is the most high-stakes legal document you will ever read.
It makes me think about how this has evolved. You mentioned the Inman Report from the 80s, but here we are in 2026. We have drones, we have cyber threats, we have long-range precision munitions. Does the 100-foot setback even matter anymore?
It matters for car bombs, which are still a primary threat. But you are right, the threat landscape has changed. Now we see embassies putting up anti-drone netting and installing massive electronic warfare suites. If you walk past some of the missions here, you might notice your cell phone signal drops or your GPS starts acting weird. That is the embassy protecting itself against drone navigation.
And that is another friction point. If the embassy is jamming GPS in a 3-block radius, they are messing with the local taxis, the delivery drivers, and the residents. Again, the security of the mission is infringing on the sovereignty and the daily life of the host nation. It is a constant trade-off between safety and the ability of the city to function.
It really highlights the cost of diplomacy in a hostile world. We want our countries to talk to each other, but the physical reality of that talking is becoming more and more burdensome. I think we are moving toward a model of what we discussed in episode 452, that boutique diplomacy idea. Maybe we don't need these massive 1,000-person embassies if they are just going to be targets. Maybe we need smaller, more agile, and more integrated missions.
But isn't the whole point of a big embassy to show presence? If the United States has this massive compound in Jerusalem, it is a sign of commitment. It is a physical anchor. If they move to a small office in a skyscraper, it looks like they are packing their bags.
That is the overt part of the security. The big building is a statement of power. But in 2026, power is being challenged by very cheap, very effective asymmetric tools. The strikes in Riyadh on the 9th showed that even a hardened compound can be vulnerable to a coordinated drone swarm, which led to the drawdowns. Let us talk about that for a second. When the State Department orders a drawdown, like they did this week, what does that actually mean for the security guys who stay behind?
It means their job gets much, much harder. A drawdown means you send home all the non-essential personnel and the families. You are left with a skeleton crew of diplomats and a massive reinforced security team. The embassy basically becomes a military outpost. The diplomatic part of the mission almost stops. You are just holding the ground.
It often is a precursor to closing the mission entirely. Or it is a way to signal to the host government that you are extremely unhappy with their ability to protect you. It is a form of diplomatic leverage. By pulling out your people, you are saying, your country is not safe enough for us to do business here. That hurts the host nation's prestige, their economy, and their standing. It is a very loud way of saying, we don't trust you.
It is a powerful tool, but it also leaves the remaining people more isolated. I want to touch on the legal side again. Article 29 of the Vienna Convention. We talked about Article 22 for the building, but Article 29 is about the person.
Right. Article 29 says the person of a diplomatic agent shall be inviolable. They are not liable to any form of arrest or detention. The host state shall treat them with due respect and shall take all appropriate steps to prevent any attack on their person, freedom, or dignity.
So if an RSO is out with the ambassador and someone tries to grab the ambassador, the RSO is basically the physical manifestation of that appropriate step. They are the shield.
But here is the catch. That immunity belongs to the state, not the individual. If an RSO uses excessive force and the host nation complains, the sending state can waive that immunity and let the guy be prosecuted. Or, more likely, they just whisk him out of the country on the next plane and he never comes back. This is the part that really sticks in the craw of local populations. They see a foreign guard do something, maybe a car accident or a shooting, and then that person is just gone. No justice, no local trial.
It is the price of the system. Without that immunity, no country would send its people into high-threat environments. They would be too afraid of being judicially kidnapped by a hostile host government. It is a shield, but like any shield, it can be used as a weapon.
We have covered a lot of the technical and legal ground. I want to pivot to the practical side for our listeners, because whether you are in Jerusalem, London, or Tokyo, you are going to encounter these missions. What are the tells that people should look for to understand what is happening behind those walls?
This is something I always pay attention to when I'm walking around the city. The first thing is the security footprint. If you see a sudden shift in the type of local police around a mission, that is a leading indicator. For example, if you usually see regular patrol officers, but suddenly it is the border police or a specialized counter-terrorism unit with long guns, you know the threat level has jumped.
And what about the physical barriers? You mentioned the T-walls earlier.
If the concrete starts moving closer to the street, or if they start closing lanes of traffic that were previously open, that tells you the setback is being expanded. That usually happens when there is specific intelligence about a vehicle threat. It is a literal expansion of the security bubble into the public space.
I also noticed the cameras. There are always cameras, but sometimes you see new ones being mounted on neighboring buildings or even on streetlights blocks away. That is the technical surveillance layer. The RSO is trying to get a better look at the approach avenues. If you see a lot of new hardware going up, it means they are worried about being watched themselves. They are trying to see who is casing the joint.
Another thing I have noticed is the gate procedure. Sometimes you can just walk past the embassy sidewalk, and other times the guards will tell you to cross the street.
That is a big one. If they are pushing the pedestrian perimeter out, it means they are worried about a suicide vest or a close-in attack. It is also a way for them to test the host nation's willingness to let them control the public space. If the local police allow the embassy guards to tell citizens where they can walk, the embassy has effectively expanded its sovereignty by proxy.
It is a fascinating, invisible war of inches. Every day, these security teams are pushing to see how much control they can have, and the host nation is pushing back to maintain its own authority. And in the middle are the citizens who just want to get to work or go home. But in a world where we are currently engaged in a massive military campaign against a regime like Iran, these fortresses are the front line. They are the most visible symbols of our presence and our defiance.
It makes me wonder about the long-term impact on the city. Jerusalem is a city of layers, a city of history, but now it is also becoming a city of high-security nodes. Does that change the character of the place?
It does. It makes the city feel more fragmented, but it is also a reflection of the reality we live in. We would love to have embassies that are open, transparent buildings with gardens that anyone can visit, but that world doesn't exist right now. Until the threat from state actors and their proxies is neutralized, the fortress is a necessity.
I think that is a good place to start wrapping up the core discussion. We have looked at the Fortress Embassy as a geopolitical statement, the legalities of the Vienna Convention, and the very real jurisdictional friction that happens every day on the streets of cities like ours. It is a complex dance, and it is one that most people never see unless they happen to be stuck in the traffic jam caused by a motorcade or a new T-wall. But for the people inside those suits and those uniforms, it is a high-stakes game where a single mistake can start a diplomatic crisis or cost lives.
Before we go, I want to give people some real-world takeaways. If you are listening to this and you live near a diplomatic mission, or you are traveling abroad, here is how you can use this information. First, recognize that security is communication. When you see a surge, don't just see guards, see a message from one government to another. It is a signal of the health of the relationship.
Second, understand the difference between inviolability and security. The building is protected by law, but the people are protected by a very delicate, negotiated set of rules. If you ever find yourself in a situation where there is an incident near an embassy, remember that the "who is in charge" question is often the most complicated part of the whole event.
And finally, look for the footprint. If you see the security posture change, it is a leading indicator of the diplomatic strain. It is often a better signal than what you hear in the official press releases. If the walls are going up, the relationship is going down.
And if you want to dive deeper into the history of how these missions are laid out, definitely go back and check out episode 501. We spent a lot of time there talking about the specific geography of the United States' presence in Israel and why it is so scattered. It provides a lot of context for why the security challenge is so unique here.
And if you are interested in what happens when the security dance fails and people get kicked out, Episode 1060 on the persona non grata process is a great companion to this one. It shows what happens when the friction finally causes the gears to lock up.
We really appreciate the prompt, Daniel. It forced us to look at our own neighborhood with a bit more of a critical eye this week. It is easy to just get annoyed by the traffic and forget the massive legal and tactical machinery that is grinding away behind those concrete walls.
Definitely. And hey, if you are enjoying the show and the deep dives we do every week, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people who are interested in these kinds of weird technical and geopolitical topics find the show. We have been doing this for over 1,100 episodes now, and the community of listeners we have built is what keeps us going.
It really does. Your feedback and your reviews are a huge part of that. You can find all of our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today, at myweirdprompts.com. We have a full archive there, plus an RSS feed if you want to subscribe directly. And if you are on Telegram, just search for My Weird Prompts. We post there every time a new episode drops, so you will never miss a deep dive.
Thanks for joining us in the fortress today. It is a strange world out there, but we are glad we get to explore it with you. As the campaign against Iran continues, keep an eye on those perimeters and watch for the next node verbale.
Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
This has been My Weird Prompts.
See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth.